regions of the Aegean were often considered to be on the periphery when it came to the great empires of the Bronze Age. Western coast of Anatolia in particular was a battleground for influence between the Hittite Empire to the east and Mycenaean Greece to the west. There, states such as Velusa and Arzava were prominently caught in the power struggle between the Hittites and the Achaeans. However, to the south, the region of Lycia roamed free, staying largely independent of foreign hegemony. To the Greeks, the inhabitants of this land were known as the Lycioi or Lycians. In their own language, however, they called themselves the Thermili and their country Thermis. By all accounts, Lycia was not a unified kingdom, but rather a loose confederation of politically decentralized polities. Each community had its own chieftain or chieftains, who apparently coordinated their alliance through a regional council of elders. In the ancient Greek sources, several tribes are mentioned as originally constituting the country of Lycia. The earliest among them were the Solimoi, presumably the original prehistoric natives of the area. Another tribe known as the Milii emerged in the region at some point in prehistory. Milii were reportedly Indo-European speakers of the Anatolian branch, likely related to the neighboring Carians. The third group, known as the Thermili, eventually arrived to Lycia from Crete according to Greek mythology. These Thermili, most likely a Greek rendering of the native Lycian name Thermili, were connected to the mythical king Sarpedon, known for his part in the Trojan War. Whether Solimoi, Milii, and Thermili really different to each other in any meaningful way, or if those were just different names for essentially the same people, is not well understood. What we do know is that by Middle to Late Bronze Age, Lycia was inhabited by the Anatolian Indo-European speakers. They were most closely related to the neighboring Carians in both language and culture. Also, they were perhaps more distantly linguistically related to the Luwian speakers of Central and Southern Asia Minor. For this reason, both Lycian and Carian are often classified as a part of the hypothetical broader Luwic language group, which also includes Pisidian, Sidetic, and Luwian among others. According to the ancient Greeks, god Apollo was known to enjoy special status in the land of Lycia. Lycians often claimed that Apollo was born in their country, and the Hellenic writers frequently called him Apollo, the Lord of Lycia. One of the earliest definite historical records of Lycia appears in the Hittite sources at the end of the 15th century BCE. The Hittite Empire was expanding into western Anatolia at the time, where a confederation of 22 states called the Asuba League was formed to oppose them. To the west, the Mycenaeans had recently conquered Crete themselves and established a foothold in coastal Anatolia, with Miletus being their main stronghold in the region. To the Hittites, the region of Lycia was known as the Lukka lands. Lukka was possibly a part of Asuba Confederation, which was eventually defeated and broken up by the Hittite king Tudhaliya. Subsequently, some of the former Asuba members became Hittite vassal states. Others, on the other hand, became fierce enemies of the Hittites. Chief among these was the kingdom of Arzava, which was traditionally allied to the Mycenaean Greeks and opposed any Hittite activity in western Anatolia. Lycia, or the Lukka lands, remained largely neutral, with no permanent allegiance to either power. Their foreign relations largely depended on the current geopolitical circumstances. The Lukka people were known as raiders and pirates across eastern Mediterranean, a reputation well known not only by the Hittites, but by the likes of the Egyptians and coastal Levantine states as well. By the end of the 15th century, both Mycenaeans and Hittites were in the process of expanding their influence across the remnants of the former Asuba Confederation. The relations between the two powers escalated when a local warlord named Maduwata was deposed by the Mycenaean commander Atarsia of Achaea and was granted refuge by the Hittites. Maduwata was appointed ruler of the Hittite-controlled land of Manzi-Pasla. From there, he continued hostilities against the Mycenaean allies, particularly against the kingdom of Arzawa. This triggered another Achaean intervention, where Atarsia marched straight to Zipasla and forced Maduwata to flee further into the Hatti lands. At this point, the Hittites sent their own general Kisnapili, and the two great powers engaged in an open military conflict. Until this point, the Lukka lands were considered largely non-aligned to either side. However, as the Mycenaeans became more aggressive with their anti-Hittite expeditions, it is likely that the Lycians sought to secure good relations with the Greeks. In particular, the cities of Tlawa and Hinduwa, corresponding to Tlos and Kandiba respectively, were among the Lycian polities which were recorded as friendly to the Achaeans and hostile to the Hatti. Eventually, after an inconclusive battle, Atarsia abandoned his attempts to conquer Zipasla, and the Hittites once more reinstalled Maduwata as its ruler. Hittite general Kisnapili now turned his attention to Lukka, which he sought to punish for siding against the Hittite Empire. Kisnapili and Maduwata both embarked on the Lycian campaign, the former marching on Hinduwa and the latter tasked with attacking Tlawa. However, Maduwata did not attack the city of Tlos, but instead conspired with the Lycians and revealed the movements of the Hittite army. The Lycian forces thus caught the Hittites in an ambush and completely routed Kisnapili's force. The Hittite general was killed in battle, as was his lieutenant PHARAOH. From this point on, the Hittite influence in western Anatolia was severely weakened. It allowed Arzawa to rise as a major regional power, supported by their Mycenaean allies. Maduwata too established himself as a powerful warlord, now at peace with both Arzawa and Achaea. He was nominally still a Hittite vassal, although largely operating independently of the Hittite influence. The rogue warlord collected troops and even tribute from Tlawa and Hinduwa, and joined the Mycenaeans themselves on several expeditions. Most notably, this Mycenaean-led party raided Cyprus on several occasions, an island which the Hittites claimed was tributary to them. However, there was very little the Hittites could do at this point, considering that their military might in the west was diminished. The Lycians, on the other hand, only continued with their piracy and became even more emboldened in the following decades. In mid-14th century, they are recorded in the Egyptian Amarna letters as raiding the Egyptian possessions. This resulted in a back-and-forth correspondence between the Egyptian pharaoh and the ruler of the Cypriot kingdom of Lycia. In a Cypriot response to Egypt, the text reads, "Why, my brother, do you say such thing to me? Does my brother not know this? As far as I am concerned, I have done nothing of the sort. Indeed, the men of Lukka, year by year, seize villages in my own country. My brother, you say to me, men from your country were with them. My brother, I myself do not know that they were with them. If men from my country were with them, send them back, and I will act as I see fit. You yourself do not know men from my country. They would not do such thing. But if men from my country did do this, then you yourself do as you see fit." The reason for this correspondence was an apparent raiding party by the Lycians directed towards the Egyptian possessions or interests. The pharaoh apparently found out that some Cypriots also took part in this, and voiced his displeasure to his counterpart in Lycia. Based on the Cypriot response, the men of Lukka constantly raided Cyprus as well, and any men of Lycia that joined them clearly did so without the Cypriot king's consent. Towards the end of the century, the geopolitical situation in western Anatolia started to shift. The Hittite Empire was revived to former glory by the great king Suppiluliuma. Suppiluliuma's successors, especially his third son Mursili II, further expanded the imperial power. Such Hittite expansion came at the expense of many of their neighbors. Among them were the cities of Atarima, Huarsanasa, and Suruda. While their precise location is undetermined, they are believed to be located somewhere within the Lukka lands, likely towards the border with the territories under Hittite control. Leaders of these cities were defeated by Mursili and the Hittite army. They were granted refuge at the Arzawan court. This sparked a larger war, one between the Hittite Empire and their long-standing enemy, the Kingdom of Arzawa. King Mursili ultimately came out victorious, and this time Arzawa was defeated for good. It was broken into several petty kingdoms, now vassals to the Hittite king. The rest of the Lukka lands by this time apparently shifted their alignment. They do not appear as necessarily hostile to the Hittites, but rather neutral and even friendly on an occasion, some of the Lycian cities perhaps serving as Hittite vassals. This shows the fluid approach the Lycians always had when it came to the great powers. They carefully navigated their relations with both Mycenaeans and Hittites according to the circumstances. Ultimately, their only loyalty were the lands of Lukka. Only decades later, in 1274 BCE, Lukka is recorded among the Hittite allies in the famed Battle of Kadesh, fought between Ramses II of Egypt and Muwatalli II of the Hittite Empire. The Egyptians recorded a long list of Hittite allies and vassals, which included numerous western Anatolian polities such as Arzawa, Mysia, Dardania, Karkia, and Lukka, among others. However, simultaneously with this, during the reigns of both Muwatalli II and his successors, the lands of western Anatolia plunged into chaos, caused by yet another vengeful warlord, PHARAOH. PHARAOH was likely of an Arzawan origin and harbored a special hatred towards anything Hittite. He was sponsored by the Mycenaeans, who were ever happy to use a proxy to further their interest at the expense of the Hatti. PHARAOH thus raised an anti-Hittite rebellion and carved out his own realm in the former Arzawan core. Anybody who was aligned with the Hittites found themselves as PHARAOH's target. Among those targets was the Hittite-aligned town of Atarima. PHARAOH reportedly showed no mercy. He marched straight to Atarima and burned the city down, together with its royal compound. The Lukka lands were in panic. They quickly appealed to both Achaia and Hatti for help. Apparently, the Lycians were divided, with some cities being pro-Mycenaean and others pro-Hittite. Both powers promptly sent their highest officials to assure and assist their respective Lycian supporters. The Hittites also attempted to negotiate with PHARAOH, although with no success. The conflict continued in the following decades, spanning across at least 35 years and reigns of 3 Hittite monarchs, Muwatalli II, Hattusili III, and Tudhaliya IV. With each passing decade, both Hittites and Mycenaeans seemed to be losing their respective grips in western Anatolia. The weakening of Mycenae was possibly caused by the internal struggles, at least judging by the numerous tales of Greek mythology. Whatever the reason was, the pro-Hittite coalition managed to push the Achaeans out of Anatolia completely during the reign of Tudhaliya IV. Many of the former Mycenaean possessions fell to the Hittite vassals, such as the kingdom of Myra. The main Achaean stronghold, Miletus, was taken by the Carians. On the other hand, the Hittites themselves would not celebrate for long. Emerging threats in the east, such as Assyria, forced the Hittite kings to focus their attention away from Western Asia Minor. This created an opening for another emerging force to roam across the eastern Mediterranean. This was a vaguely attested alliance of many entities, better known as the Sea Peoples. How and why this confederation was formed and how exactly it operated is not known. What we do know is that the coalition was very hostile to the civilizations of the Near East and that Lukka was among its most consistent members. According to the Egyptian sources, in the 5th regnal year of Pharaoh Merneptah, dated to about 1208 BCE, the Sea Peoples consisting of Ekwesh, Shekelesh, Sherden, Teresh, and Lukka allied themselves with the Libyans in a war against Egypt. In the ensuing Battle of Perire, however, Pharaoh Merneptah came out victorious, driving the Sea Peoples off the African coast and decisively defeating the Libyans. The Sea Peoples, on the other hand, remained active and even increased their activities by the turn of the century. However, at that time, yet another highly impactful event took place. Traditionally dated to a time between 1194 and 1184 BCE, the Trojan War was catastrophic to both sides of the Aegean Sea. Unfortunately, we do not have any contemporary historical records that give any detail about this conflict, except sporadic Hittite mentions of hostilities concerning Wilusa throughout the 13th century. Archaeological evidence, however, does point to the destruction of the site of Troy in the early 12th century BCE. Ancient Greek sources, based on the centuries-long oral tradition before being written down in the 8th century BC, paint a picture of a great war, where the Mycenaean coalition, led by King Agamemnon, fought Troy and her allies for 10 years. Lycia is prominently featured in the conflict, led by its king Sarpedon, and allied with the Trojans. Sarpedon fights bravely but is ultimately killed by the Achaean hero Patroclus. The remaining Lycian force continued to fight on under Sarpedon's captain Glaucus, until he too fell in battle, by the hand of Ajax the Great. Ultimately, despite heavy losses, the Achaeans managed to win the war. The city of Troy was destroyed and burned to the ground. Details of historical events concerning the Trojan War are difficult to determine, besides the fact that Troy or Wilusa was indeed destroyed in the early part of the century. We also do not know what possible role the so-called Sea Peoples had in this, given that Lukka was certainly a part of this coalition at the time. It is very possible that the Trojan War happened as a part of the wider late Bronze Age collapse, which was unfolding across all of the great Mediterranean kingdoms. From Greece to Anatolia to Egypt, chaos was everywhere. And likewise, the Sea Peoples continued their campaigns. Although we do not know many of their members besides Lukka, at least some of the entities are believed to be associated with the Aegean, especially with Crete and the Mycenaean Greece. Names such as Ekwesh are believed by the scholars to be rendering of the Achaeans, who are thought to be a part of the coalition at least in some capacity. Other groups, such as the Peleset, reportedly originated in Crete, while Denyan, Teresh, and possibly Weshesh were all variously connected with various groups within the Mycenaean world. The Hittite sources from the beginning of the 12th century record a war against the coalition of the West. This possibly corresponds with the Egyptian records of the Sea Peoples, although it cannot be known for certain. The Hittites under Suppiluliuma II were fighting a war against the Western Alliance consisting of Lukka, Mysia, Icuna, Tamina, and Uyanawanda. Although Suppiluliuma claims victory in the Hittite texts, further records show that the conflict clearly continues. Lukka itself is shown as a major Hittite adversary and the location where the fleet of the Hittite and Ugaritic ships was sent in order to halt the enemy advance. It also seems that the Mycenaeans, either in official capacity or otherwise, took part in these hostilities and were on the side of Lukka. Ultimately, the Hittite effort was defeated, and the Western coalition proceeded to destroy the Lycia, Ugarit, and the Hittite Empire itself. The Hittite capital Hattusa was sacked and burned at about 1180 BCE. Bronze Age collapse continued in Greece, where cities such as Pylos, Thebes, and even Mycenae were sacked around the same time. The Achaean power was greatly reduced and continued to decline throughout the century. Many Mycenaean refugees decided to leave Greece and settled elsewhere, as was the case with their colonization of Cyprus. The Sea Peoples continued their advances into Levant and went all the way to Egypt, where they were finally defeated by Pharaoh Ramses III. However, the people of Lukka were not reported to have taken part in this final battle. The late Bronze Age collapse brought an end of an era, a fall of civilizations across the Mediterranean Sea. However, one of the places where the collapse was felt the least was none other than Lycia. Despite being participants in many wars, the Lycians did not experience widespread collapse in their own land. They entered the new age destruction-free, conducting their business as per usual. Piracy and raiding were the order of the day, a reputation that the Lycians would carry into the classical, Hellenistic, and even the Roman times. More episodes on the Bronze Age civilizations and kingdoms are on the way, so make sure to subscribe to the channel. This was WanaxTV.